Welcome back to the Zag Talk podcast. I'm your host, Carson Hollyoak, joined by my co-hosts, Brian Mary and Dylan Graff, back from his one podcast episode suspension. Today, we have a full agenda. We got some updates on the recruiting front, mainly for the 2023 class as that starts to heat up. Some preseason rankings and polls that released this last week to talk about some awards or preseason award lists to go over. And then finally, a continuation of our player question segment as we head into this season. Now 3 weeks away from opening night, not including the exhibition games. So let's dive into it. First, on the recruiting front, there's a lot going on in the 2023 class right now. We have offers out to our class priority, which is Mookie Cook, formerly out of Portland. He was at Jefferson High School there, I believe. Now he's at Compass Prep in Arizona, number 4 in the class, a 6'7" wing. Just a freak of nature athletically. You'll see as kind of a trend as we go through the list of guys that we're looking at in the 2023 class. It's going to be a guard-heavy class. We do have at least one big guy we're looking at, but these are mostly going to be point guards, shooting guards, and wings as we expect Sallis and Stromer and, our group of guards that we have now to probably be pro in 2 or 3 years. So, just to keep a note there, we also have an offer out to Dusty Stromer, who's a 6'6", 2-3 guard from California. He's number 39 in the class of 2023, and we're apparently pretty high on him. Another one that was a little bit of a surprise that we haven't heard a lot about so far is Jackson Shellstad. He's from Westland, Oregon, currently ranked the number 1 player in the state, number 68 on 24/7. 6-foot point guard. He also has offers from Arizona State, Florida, Kansas, Houston, Oregon, Texas Tech, and also picked up an offer from UCLA this week. So he's trending up. So someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah. We it's interesting. We have a few other guys, and it seems like all these guys are kind of connected. Like, well, let's go through all of them first, then we can kind of, chatter about them. Layden Blocker. This was kind of a little bit of a surprise. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this kid put out a Tipton edit with the Gonzaga logo, over a picture of himself, basically saying, this is my top 7 or whatever he put out there. As far as we know, like, I mean, look, we don't know anything behind the scenes or anything, but it was kind of a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. There's speculation that he maybe just put our logo on there because he wants to draw more interest, and that's great. I mean, I think that's a sign that we are at the peak of the basketball recruiting world at this point, which is pretty dang cool if you ask me. So I'll take it. But yeah, Layden Blocker, 95th in the 24/7 composite, and number 15 point guard in the class. So if you're interested, feel free to check out his highlights. And then AJ Casey, he was a priority target for us. It seems like we kind of stopped recruiting him weeks ago. That was kind of a weird deal when he posted the date and the time when he was going to be committing, and then I think it was either Jim Meehan or someone on Twitter retweeted it, basically just saying Gonzaga is no longer interested in him or something like that. Really weird. But anyway, we stayed in the conversation till the very end with him. It was down to DePaul and Miami. He ended up choosing Miami. He also dropped pretty dramatically in the 24/7 rankings. So it seems like there may have been something going on behind the scenes there. Not totally sure. And then Anthony Black, he's in the class of 2022. We talked a little bit about him in the last episode. Go check that out. But more details have kind of come out about his whole eligibility process. He recently just lost his appeal. So he will not be playing varsity high school basketball in the state of Texas this year. So with that said, one piece of positive news is that he recently was invited to join Team USA on the junior squad. So I believe not the U19 squad, but the junior squad, which is generally made up of high school kids. So Pretty cool accomplishment for him on that front. There are a few others to keep an eye on. Dylan, do you want to take these two fellas here?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to note, I think, on this one is with the AJ Casey, and then you made a comment about Layden Blocker as well. Gonzaga showing up there without an offer or after pulling off the recruiting trail is an interesting trend. It'll be interesting to see if that's something that continues going forward. Obviously, when you're looking at guys that are, the following year, so you're looking at 2022 guys, you're probably not going to see that happen as much. But it is going to be interesting going forward, seeing guys that are maybe 2 years out and aren't getting a ton of official offers from schools start to put schools like Gonzaga alongside schools like Duke, UNC, and some of the top schools in the country. So super cool there.
It's a little interesting drawing the similarities between those two, and this might just be grasping at straws, but it does seem, if you look at Layden Blocker, he's number 34 in 247 rankings, like in their own rankings, but 95 in the composite. And that's dropped, like his composite ranking has dropped from like the 40s to the 90s. So he's trending downwards. They haven't changed his ranking yet in their own rankings, but he was trending downwards. We know AJ Casey dropped from like at one point being top 15 to now like in the hundreds. So it almost seems like both of them have used that as, throw Gonzaga in there to be like, hey, look, they're still looking at me, because there maybe had been interest at one point, but no offers. So weird to see. We hadn't heard a lot about those. I don't expect Layden Blocker to be a Zag. I don't think we're actively recruiting him, but you never know.
Yeah, looking at a couple other 2023 guys, Kylan Boswell, 6'1" point guard, another point guard on the list, number 11 in class of 2023, expressed a lot of interest in Gonzaga recently. In an interview with Rivals, he talked about how much he liked the fast-paced offense. He talked about Tommy Lloyd going to Arizona. He said, we were talking to him about the Gonzaga and he's kind of like the guy behind the scenes that created the offense. So he likes Gonzaga's really fast-paced offense and scoring ability. And of course, Mark Few's a really great coach who wouldn't want to go play for him. So smart comments from Kylan. The other big name from class of 2023, big center, 6'10" center out of California, Jazz Gardner. Couple of things to note here. First off, same AAU team that Dom Harris did. As we know, Dom is a huge recruiter for the Zags. So we'll see what kind of connections he can draw there. The other one to note there is that he also received a offer from another WCC school, Pepperdine, almost in back-to-back or in a couple days apart, was able to garner offers from both, or was able to meet with both schools. So cool there to see WCC guys, other WCC schools, at least having a shot at some of these top 100 guys, it speaks to some of the level of upgraded play in the WCC going forward. So yeah, that kind of rounds out some of the guys we're talking about. But any word on players and whatnot that we could potentially see for Texas game?
Yeah, I think, one guy we still haven't mentioned is Jared Mccain. I know there had been talk about him for a while now, potentially coming on campus this fall. I think they were targeting the Texas game and trying to get as many of the 2023 guys as possible, at least one other guy. So that's something to keep an eye out for as we get closer to that Texas game, just because, why wouldn't you want to recruit there? It's going to be the first big game in the kennel in over 2 years or 2 seasons, top 5 matchup. So, the atmosphere is going to be crazy. It's going to be a high level of basketball. So I would look for McCain and potentially another one of those 2023 guys that we've mentioned above, and maybe some more throughout the fall as we look to get some of them on campus. And there's been interest from them getting on campus. So a little more on McCain. Just for some background, he's another guard, a 6'2" shooting guard out of California, number 24 in the class of 2023. So a lot of potential for this class, probably similar to the 2021 class, where this could be maybe match or around the same level of recruiting class as we have had for 2021.
A lot of West Coast guys as well. You talked about multiple from California, Oregon, Arizona, although I know Mookie, who's down in Arizona now, is originally from Portland, or at least was formerly at Jefferson in Portland. I'm not sure where he's originally from. And, you got Gardner as well. So interesting to see us pulling back to the West Coast a little bit. Obviously, there's, a lot of West Coast potential. Not seeing as many names from the East Coast that we've seen the last couple of years, or the Midwest we've seen the last couple of years on Gonzaga recruiting charts.
One thing that I think is pretty interesting, and this may be a continuing pattern that emerges, and it might just be the fact that more better high school prospects are just gravitating towards a few, of the big time schools. But a lot of these players have direct connections to each other. I believe Jared McCain and Dusty Stromer play on the same AAU team. Kylan Boswell actually played with, I believe he played with Jared McCain. Both of them went to Centennial, I believe, or I think Jared McCain might still go to Centennial. But Kylan Boswell is transferring to Compass Prep in Arizona, which is where Mookie Cook recently transferred to. So there's a lot of these kind of cross-pollination events that are happening across high school basketball. Pretty interesting. I'm sure it makes a lot of college coaches' jobs a lot easier. If you only have to attend one game to see 2 or 3 prospects that you're targeting, I mean, it's time saved. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I want to hit on the Kylan Boswell quote real quick that you brought up though, Dylan. The context of that quote is really funny actually, because he was being interviewed with Rivals, and the person asked him about Gonzaga and like, oh, tell me about how excited you are about, whatever being talked to, by Gonzaga. And he immediately brought up Tommy Lloyd. I was just like, great, fantastic. That's it's just what we want to hear. But anyway, we'll put a link to that interview in the show notes. I just thought it was pretty funny.
Gonzaga's sweep of the AP preseason poll, KenPom, and Haslametrics preseason rankings, as those all got released in the last week, as signs that we're moving closer and closer to the season. Maybe we'll touch on some of our biggest takeaways and then some of our surprises or disagreements there. I think some of the highlights from the AP poll, Gonzaga is the 6th program in AP preseason or AP poll history to be a preseason number 1 in back-to-back seasons. They join the likes of Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, UCLA, and UNLV. And it's the first time since 1990 that 2 West Coast teams are number 1. That was Arizona and UCLA that season. So, Gonzaga, UCLA lead it off. I think that was probably expected. UCLA is the only other team that got first place votes. Gonzaga took 55 of the 63. Some other notable ones, Kansas, who had a big offseason in terms of bringing guys back and bringing in Remy Martin. That was, they're going to be a good team this year. Villanova bringing a lot of guys back with the COVID extra year of eligibility. Texas, who we play, we end up having matchups against the number 2, number 5, number 9, number 14 teams. And then if you extended the rankings, we'd have 33 against Texas Tech. Yeah, number 1 in KenPom. We're the 3rd highest ever in the preseason KenPom rankings. Obviously, bringing back some guys from last year's team and having a historically high rating there is going to inflate that number a bit. Same with Haslametrics, number 1 on offense, number 2 in defense. As we know with some of the statistical websites, they're not super reliable early in the season in these preseason rankings, as it takes, about a dozen or so games to kind of feel out where this year's team is. There's a lot of forecasting and a lot of variables that have to be plugged in. For some of the teams that only played conference games last year, played fewer games, it's going to be even more murky this year, just because the sample size is less. So take it with a grain of salt, but I think it was expected that Gonzaga would be number 1 in those categories, just, mix of last year and the way that the style that we play now. It's kind of expected. But what were your guys' biggest surprises? Let's go AP poll.
I think biggest surprise, seeing St. Bonaventure on there. Brian and I were chatting before the show. First ever top 25 appearance for St. Bonnie for the Bonnies. So that's a pretty cool one. Cool to see them make the top 25 there. for AP. Didn't make it on for either of the metrics charts, but cool to see them break top 25. I think the other one, Brian, you want to talk a little bit about Baylor and their location on the different charts?
What I think is interesting about where Baylor lands is in Haslametrics, they're at 3, in KenPom they're at 4. In the AP poll, they are at number 8. So I think that it's pretty interesting. One thing that Ken Pomeroy, he either tweeted this out or said this in an interview or something, or when he released his preseason rankings, he said something to the effect of, hey, this is only a preseason, preseason metrics, just ignore these for all intents and purposes, or disregard these. So I thought that was pretty funny. I think the metrics based stuff, I mean, it maybe just leans more heavily towards last year's performance, because losing all the pieces that Baylor has, I think that they probably are closer to where the AP poll puts them. So just thought that was pretty interesting. At this point, the metrics based systems really like Baylor. We'll see how that changes throughout the season. But yeah, I mean, can they make up for losing Davion Mitchell, Teague and Butler? We'll see.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things. I mean, I knew just from some of the way too early polls that Baylor was going to be in the top 10. And I think they could have the pieces to put together a solid team. I mean, you bring back Flagler and Mayer, and then they're two big guys. You got Everyday John and Flo Thamba. And I think they bring in 2 top 30, top 35 players plus the guard from Arizona. So they have a lot of pieces. But I think it also is underplaying how significant a role and how the presence of Jared Butler and Mark Vidal, Maceo Teague, and Davion Mitchell, like what they brought. I mean, those are special guys, especially Mitchell and Butler. But I mean, all of them have just been there forever. They knew the system. They played together forever. And so while I think Flagler's a great player and Mayer, I think, is a great role player, I don't know necessarily how he's going to step into a major role. I think that could be one that you might see early on in the season taking a bit of a hit in terms of rankings, but you never know. They have the pieces. It's just how it all meshes and if they can really recover from those guys missing. But I would think that their KenPom stuff, the statistical based stuff, would probably take a pretty big hit. I mean, I even said that for Gonzaga. I think our first few games of the season, you'll probably see that 31.49 adjusted EM drop, just because got young guys, got new guys. That's a really high rating to start the season. That's pretty hard to get up to right away. But back to the AP poll, I think one of the big polarizing discussions on Twitter and in the basketball world has been UCLA at number 2. There's not a lot of people in the middle. Either people think that, yes, absolutely, they're number 2. Maybe they should be number 1. I saw Andy Katz today put UCLA number 1 in his Power 36. I think he likes to do things like that to be different, because I think that's not accurate. But you have those people, and then you have the other people who think that there's no way they're a top 5 team. Some people don't even think they're top 10. They say, look, they weren't a good team for 90% of the season last year. They got hot during March, made a Final Four run, and, played out of their minds. Bring back everybody, bring in Peyton Watson, bring in the guy from Rutgers, the big guy. So, yeah, I get them being at number 2. It makes sense. I don't think that I think there's a higher chance that they're not the second best team in the country by the end of the season then there is a chance of them being, the number 1 or the number 2 team. But I totally understand why they're ranked there. It's hard when you have a Final Four team that brings back everybody and adds guys to not have them there. But,
I mean, where would you put them though? Where would you put them?
I'd probably still have them. Like I said, I don't disagree with them being number 2 to start the season, because I feel like that's logical. Fair. I think it's also perfectly logical for there to be a lot of questions around whether they can sustain that. And honestly, I was looking at the stats from the tournament. Like, it's not like they played great basketball for the whole entire tournament. They beat Michigan State in overtime, a bad Michigan State team. Then they played BYU, who shot like 20% from three and beat them. And obviously their defense had played a part in that. Then they played Abilene Christian, not a tough game. And then sure, they beat Alabama and Michigan. Michigan played terrible against them. The score's 51-49. It was a high scoring overtime game against Alabama, but they really didn't shoot well in that game either. And then they shot the lights out against Gonzaga. And obviously Juzang was playing great, but there's a lot of consistency questions in my mind. But yeah, like I said, there's as many questions around. I mean, Kansas and Villanova, you know a little bit more about what you're getting, but there's as many questions around, Texas, Michigan, Baylor, Duke, Kentucky has a bunch of new guys. So I just really don't know where else you would put them, but I think it's fair that there's questions about them.
I think we talked about, Carson, you kind of put the nail on the head of like, saying Johnny Juzang had a great game. Like if you look back and like they've got some dogs on that team that are back this year. They've got some really, 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 really good individual players. The question is going to be, can they end up playing together like they did to win games in the tournament? And, even then, they had games where they didn't shoot the lights out, or they did shoot the lights out, and that's the only reason the game was even close, or they had teams not shooting lights out against them. Again, testament to their defense a bit. But I think, like, to your point, there are a lot more question marks about how they're going to play as a team and how they're going to continue, whether they're going to continue last year's regular season, play, which was decent, or whether they're going to continue last season's Final Four play, right? Like that's the question mark. Whereas you look at teams like Kansas, Texas, like they're returning and or bringing in new guys, but you feel like you kind of know how Texas is going to play together. I feel like a little bit better than how UCLA might play together. And that's not me arguing that Texas should be ranked higher than them or whatever, but I just think like that's another piece that plays into it, is like individual player versus like how are they going to actually end up meshing as a team. Obviously it's a question mark for any team, but I feel like we just know Kansas is probably always going to mesh a little bit better, and regardless of talent, is probably going to be in a pretty good spot. I could see a scenario where UCLA doesn't even win the Pac-12. I think that's possible. So I think the other surprising team for me, at least in AP, was Purdue at 7. Now, would I move them up to top 5? Maybe. I'm pretty high on Purdue. I think they're going to be a phenomenal team this year. I think Jaden Ivey and Zach Edey are going to be really, really good. And with the two of them, Edey being a 7'4" big man inside, and he'll probably even come off the bench again this year if they go small. And then the other one being Trevion Williams. The kid is a scorer, to say the least. He averaged 15.5 and 9 last year, playing one of the forward positions. He also had the best assist rate on the team for Purdue last year. So when you have a big man that can facilitate, Gonzaga's seen it before. When you have a big man that can pass and facilitate, you've got a really, really strong team. So I think Purdue's probably going to end up being a top 5 team when we get to the end of the season. Them at 7 isn't, necessarily a terrible ranking, but they're just a team where I'm looking at them and I'm like, man, that is an end of season top 5 Final Four team. I really do think, and they've got a great coach, Matt Painter, as well. So Purdue's one of my big ones. I see moving up the chart.
Texas you think that they're going to mesh better than UCLA? You have a brand new coach and like 6 transfers coming in. I think they're going to really, really struggle early. I think maybe I don't know, because you got pieces at UCLA too, but I think they could come together. But the thing is with Texas is they have a lot of the same stuff. Like they have a lot of the same position, at least. Like they're really, really guard heavy. And we've talked about this and we'll talk about it again in the future for the Gonzaga Texas matchup. They only have like 2 guys on their roster that are 6'9" or taller, and they're both 6'9". Yeah. The rest are all guards. That's mostly who they brought in. But like, you got to learn a whole new system under Chris Beard for the guys who are returning. And then the guys coming in had to learn a new system anyway. But Chris Beard I think by the time it gets to March, like he'll have his guys going, but that's like not a normal defensive scheme either. And there's a lot of principles in there that you got to learn that are going to be tough.
Yeah.
But
I
again,
think that Chris Beard's historically good teams relied heavily on their defense.
Yeah,
and this, I don't know
absolutely.
if this team is ready ready to do that, considering who they're bringing in myself.
No, that's a totally fair call. The two examples I probably should have given is coming back and meshing teams would be Kansas and Villanova then. You know, those two teams are turning a lot of key players, great coaches, historical programs. Not that UCLA doesn't have a great coach and a historical program. Obviously, you know, could see Kansas and Villanova really meshing right off the bat. And UCLA, you know, we'll see what UCLA we get when the season starts.
So I've got one question for each of you, and then we can move on. Well, it's kind of a two-part question. In the AP poll, who, in your opinion, is ranked too high and who is ranked too low?
For too high, I think Villanova is ranked too high. I think they've been, you know, put into the whole top tier, top 3, top 5 teams just because, you know, you got their two guys, Gillespie and I'm blanking on the other guy coming back, using their extra year. They had depth issues last year. Their 5 guys were good. They lost Robinson Earl, who was kind of their go-to scorer. Now, sure, you get some extra experience, and I think they brought in maybe a couple guys, either transfers or recruits, but I just don't see them having the firepower to compete with that top tier. I think they'll still be good, but I don't think they're a top 5, you know, top tier team. Dylan, I'll let you go for yours before I come back because I need to think about who I think is underrated.
So your overrated team was Villanova. I'm going to move a little bit farther down. I think I could pick some teams out of that top 10, but I'm going to say Oregon's probably a little bit too high. As much as I just made the comment that like UCLA might not even win the Pac-12, Oregon at 13 is surprising. I don't see, I think, and it's less that Oregon at 13 is surprising to me. It's that there's teams below them that I see being better than them. Specifically, Ohio State, Houston, Tennessee all seem to me stronger teams eye test than Oregon this upcoming season. And the metrics also kind of show that. I don't see Oregon top 25 in Haslam. I'm straining my eyes to look at our KenPom list, and I don't think I see them on there either. Again, statistical analysis can be thrown out the window at the beginning of the season, but I just don't see them as much of a strong top 15 team this upcoming year. Carson, or I guess Brian, you want to talk about your most overrated?
Sure. Why not? I don't know. I've been kind of evaluating, who we're going to be playing this upcoming season. I watched the blue versus white. I think they call it Countdown to Craziness. Duke does their scrimmage. To me, their success is going to be heavily dependent on Paolo, who is an outstanding player. Potential National Player of the Year candidate, potential number 1 overall pick. I don't know if he has enough around him, to be honest. They've got like one other big besides him who likes to play inside. Him and Paolo are going to have to get a lion's share of the rebounds. Wendell Moore, I mean, solid, really solid. I just don't know if he is capable of scoring a bunch of points alongside Paolo. They're going to be a really good team. Are they the 9th best team? I don't think so. I'd probably put them, I don't know. I'd put them maybe in the high teens, maybe just ahead of North Carolina, or maybe just behind North Carolina myself. But yeah, so I think that's who's too high myself. Too low? Any thoughts?
I've been eyeing the 10 through 12 range in the AP poll, but I think I'm going to go with Illinois. Those are all kind of different stories. Kentucky brought in a bunch of guys after the disaster that was last year. And then Memphis, obviously, with the huge recruits. They have a lot of potential, but I'm going to go with Illinois. They bring back a lot of guys. They bring back Kofi Coburn, Curbelo, and I think who was the other guard? They had another guard that started and played a lot of minutes last year that they're bringing back as well.
Fraser,
yeah. So I think just from an experience standpoint, yes, it's going to hurt them losing Desunmu, but you bring back a lot of guys. Coburn is going to dominate most teams. In the Big Ten, he's going to have some more competition with, Dickinson at Michigan, and then also Edie and Travion Williams at Purdue. But I think they have a chance to probably hop some of the teams ahead of them, just maybe more them being more steady and consistent, less volatility than some of these young teams that try to put it together with a lot of new pieces.
I kind of really like Tennessee. They had a lot of good pieces last year. They lost a couple of good pieces with Keon Johnson and Jaden Springer both leaving for the NBA. Keep Vescovi, who played on ball last year for them. He moves off ball to make room for Kennedy Chandler, who's a top 25 recruit for them, who I think is going to make their offense a lot more aggressive. I think he's really going to make them move around a little bit more. He's really going to push the ball. I feel like Tennessee really struggled last year with offense, despite having a really good defense. I feel like they've also, Vescovi's moving off ball. He's shoots the lights out. Like, he is going to be a really good player this year, especially if he's able to play off ball. They also bring in Justin Powell from Auburn as well, who's another big shooter. So they made it so that Kennedy can facilitate while also being able to score. And I think I really do like them as a team next year, as a top 10 team. I don't know if they're a Final Four team, but I do think they're a little bit underrated when it comes to AP.
I like Ohio State. They did really well last year. A lot of the season in the Big Ten. I think they fell short. I can't remember if they were playing Michigan or Illinois in the Big Ten tournament, but they fell just short there. And I believe it was Dwayne Washington who ended up missing the shot or whatever. That play in particular is fresh in my mind. But who they bring back? I mean, EJ Liddell. I'm really high on him. I think that he is an outstanding player. I think he's going to be really good. And they're bringing a lot of guys back for an extra year. They're taking advantage of their extra COVID year. So they're going to have a ton of experience. So I think that they're going to surprise some people, potentially jump into the top 10 fairly early in the year with I believe it's the Big Ten ACC Challenge where so they'll be playing tough teams early on. I think they'll be really good.
We're going to have a lot of the really annoying fan bases have good teams this year, which is going to suck because you got Kansas, UCLA. I think that one dude got banned from Twitter, the Johnny Juzang with the red eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I think he got banned, but you got the Kansas dipshits on the whatever that Rock Chalk page was. We all know about Michigan. I was hoping maybe they'd stay off Twitter while they were focusing, or basketball Twitter while they were focusing on the football team for a little longer this year, but they're already out in full force. Duke here and there, they're not always terrible, but some of them are. And then you got Kentucky as well. I was
going to say Kentucky's going to be good this year, but I don't even want to. Next year, you look at the recruiting class for 2022.
Yeah.
Holy shit. Kentucky's going to be annoying as hell next year. And they're going to be good. I mean, they're going to be really, really good next year. Before we move to our player question segment, I want to make a couple of kind of directly related to AP, but a couple of award watch comments. One, our boy Drew Timme gets unanimous National Player of the Year preseason votes. Timme and Nembhard both lock up all WCC preseason team. Not surprising, Nembhard is on the Cousy Award list. Surprising, Hunter Sallis makes the West Award list. We have yet to see a Karl Malone or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or small forward would be...
I'm blanking. Kispert won it
last year.
Is it Irving?
Julius Irving? It is Irving.
Yes.
Yep, it's Irving. Julius Irving Award.
Those will be released the last 3 days of this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yep.
Nice.
Also, clarifying on the Timme National Player of the Year, that was just the Athletics National Player of the Year, right? That's not an actual preseason vote yet, or did I miss that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just the athletic. Yep.
And then the only thing I think is worth mentioning, we'll probably see Timmy and Chet's names both on some lists later this week with Malone and Kareem coming out later. My only question to you guys is who goes on which list? Do they both go on both? Does one go on one and one go on the other?
What was Timmy last year? He was on the center one, right?
No.
He was power
Timmy
forward?
was on Karl Malone last year. He got best power forward.
I have no clue. That's a great question because the way they're going to play on our team this year, like, but also 7 foot. I mean, it doesn't really matter. They're not judging it off of like, oh, you don't fit this role exactly. So I think Chet's probably going to be listed as a center, right? Or is they're just going to go forward?
I think they listed Timmy that way last year because they wanted to give Garza the center award and they couldn't give.
That's actually true.
Both that award.
So like, there's no way they're in the same category. They wouldn't do that.
Mm-mm.
I think the really interesting thing that could happen, I could see it happening, is Chet goes on the Kareem list and has a chance at it. Timmy goes down to Chet goes on the Karl Malone list just because he plays a little bit more outside. Timmy bumps down to the Kareem list, and in back-to-back seasons, Timmy, and I'm pretty sure on this, like 95% sure, Timmy will be the first person to ever win 2 national awards at a different position of the Hoop Hall awards. If he were to win Kareem this year, he'd win the Karl Malone and then the Kareem in back-to-back seasons.
I wonder how if there's any guidance from them on, like, if they would opt to just keep him in the same one because he won it the year before, or if they'll say it's different. I mean, but really he plays more of a center position offensively.
Exactly.
But if he does get moved to the center position for those awards, that's going to be a stacked award pool because you're going to, I mean, if you're Kofi Coburn or the guy from Michigan, Hunter Dickinson, you're probably pissed because, and then power forward, you're probably going to have Paulo in there. So they should make that the freshman award and move Timmy to the center, and it can be all the old big dudes. All right, so on to our player question segment. This is now the 3rd week of this. If you missed our last 2 episodes, we have now covered, Julian Strawther, Andrew Nemhard, Rozier Bolton, Caden Perry, Chet Holmgren. I'm missing one. Who else did we cover? Nolan Hickman. So we have 4 left. The guys we're going to talk about today are Hunter Sallis and Anton Watson. And then we'll wrap it up with Timmy and Ben Gregg next week. Let's start with Hunter Sallis, as we just talked about him on the award list. First question, how quickly will he adapt to the new pace, physicality, and overall competition level of college basketball? Maybe a little background to give this some more context. We saw his recruiting rank drop a little bit but at the end of the year last year, as the recruiting period ended and he had some of the national camps and McDonald's All-American, maybe some of the things that were out there were that he didn't play at the highest level of competition, I guess, in high school. He played normal high school ball. He wasn't playing, at a prep school or a national schedule. So there was some
normal high school ball in Nebraska.
In Nebraska, yes, Omaha, Nebraska. And I don't know what classification it was or how many they have there, but I think the idea is that he is playing in a local schedule. A lot of other guys are playing national schedules, playing at prep schools, at least that are ranked up that high. So there was some sense that, maybe it would take him a little bit longer to adjust to the college game and get used to the competition. And that was seen a little bit in some of the scrimmages. And I think that's why maybe I think speaking for all of us, maybe I'm wrong, see him. I think a lot of the national guys, because of his ranking, see him as a starter this year immediately. And I don't think we see that. I think he's going to come off the bench. I think he's going to play a lot of minutes and be a big piece of the team. And maybe he moves into a role later in the year in the starting lineup. But I think that's going to be a huge thing.
I think that he is going to take a little bit longer. I don't know about the pace, but the physicality piece and overall competition level, I think he's going to take a little bit longer to adapt to something like that with Gonzaga, especially opening up with a pretty brutal schedule. I don't see him starting on this Gonzaga team. I see him coming off the bench at the beginning of the season. That being said, I think when we talked about potential starting lineups earlier, I kind of was really high on Hickman, even had Hickman potentially bumping out Rasir. I think that second guard spot, still totally up in the air. I think the other 4 spots are locked with Nemhard, Strother, Timmy, and Chet. However, if Rasir starts the season, which I think at this point is where I'm shifting to, if Rasir starts the beginning of the season, I could see Sallis being the guy that bumps Rasir out of that 2 guard spot, and I could see our tournament time, barring injury, our starting lineup being Nemhard, Sallis, Strother, Timmy, Chet, Timmy, in that order from 1 to 5. I don't know. I think it's just going to take him a little longer to adapt. I think your point about not playing the highest level of competition. I think he's going to come into his own later in the season. He looked pretty good in craziness. Looked pretty fun in the dunk competition. I think he surprised me a little bit with just how physical, or at least I guess more accurately, how athletic he looked. So I'm excited to see where he goes this season.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. Like he's super athletic. The question for me, I don't know. I haven't looked at his stats from high school, but what kind of shooter he is. That's kind of the only reason why I would think maybe Hickman would have the edge if there was a change there. But I do agree in terms of like a traditional lineup, he'd probably be better suited to go there. But if we're struggling to find, spot up shooting, outside. But I mean, you look at it, if Nemhard's shooting well, Strother's shooting well, Chet can shoot, maybe you don't need that. Sallis has been a weird one for me because I know there's a lot of hype around him. Obviously, I think when you said we are surprised that he was on the West Award list, I think it's because we don't see him as a starter right now, and he might take a little more time to come along. But I think he totally does have the potential to be there, and I think he's a guy who I'm almost waiting to be pleasantly surprised by and just kind of be like, oh, wow, like, okay, like he's ready. And when you see it kind of click for him, I don't know what the defensive end is going to look like. I think he's a decent on-ball defender, but I don't know. That's sometimes a thing that takes guys maybe the longest to adjust as a freshman, especially when you haven't played that level. But yeah, like you said, I think it's going to take a while. I think by the time the end of the season comes around, it's going to be a similar thing to Zach Collins, obviously different positions, but where, he looks raw at the beginning of the year. He looks like, he's getting used to it, maybe some foul trouble, not quite there. And then you're going to see it really come on towards the end of the season. He's going to be a huge piece of this team.
Yeah, you compare him to Hickman. I think Sallis has the lower floor, but also the higher ceiling than Hickman.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
we could get.
Well, and that's where you look at. And I think when I was saying Hickman potentially moving in early, or if like there was an injury, I think he's who moves in because he has had that experience playing against a higher level of competition. And that's why you saw him do so well at some of those camps where, Chet, Sallis, and him were at. Like, he's ready. He's played that level. He has that kind of maturity and like poise to his game already. So that's the primary reason. Like, he looks ready to go when you watch Hickman play. Like, he looks ready to go. Sallis, you can tell the talent's there and it's going to shine out eventually. It's just polishing it off and getting used to it.
I think one thing that guys can struggle with, especially when they are typically the most athletic player on the floor, or they're used to being the most athletic player on the floor, some of the basics can get lost. Like, if you can just jump over guys to grab every rebound, you're not going to work on boxing out, right? And I think we might see a little bit of that, where on the defensive end, he maybe, turns his back on the guy he's guarding and, misses out on rebounds and things like that. Maybe he dribbles into traffic too often, or in ill-advised situations because he's not used to playing against players as athletic or with as much length at the college level. I think in terms of pace, I think the college game actually suits his athleticism better. And we saw it a little bit in the scrimmage, which, as we talked about, you can't really tell a whole lot from it, but it seems like he thrives in the open floor. He thrives running, running the floor, getting out in passing lanes and just being an athlete out there. So I think that, early on and moving through this summer, I was kind of like, we'll see. It seems like he bulked up a little bit. It seems like he has done some things, physically to get himself ready for this season, which has made me really, really excited to see what he can do. I think his role this year is going to be kind of more the Joel Ayayi type role, where he's maybe more of a slasher and cutter, sneaking behind defenders on the baseline and is relied upon to be that, 2 or 3 guard that gets a bunch of rebounds. And I think he's still, regardless of if he boxes out or not, he'll still be able to get a ton of rebounds because he's athletic and long. So that's just my 2 cents. I think it'll take some time for him to get polished, but I do think he's ready for Division I basketball.
Yeah, I think sometimes I forget when I'm thinking about him and maybe I let the thoughts of him not being quite polished, or however you want to say it, with the competition level and being ready. And I think of him as maybe more like a Strother last year or a Harris last year. But then I think about it, I'm like, all right, well, this kid was a top 15 recruit, or top at one point. I think he dropped into the 20s or something, or maybe 30, but like, he's really good. So I think that's why I'm preparing myself to be really surprised by him, because I've maybe sandbagged on him a little bit more than I should be. But I'm okay with pleasantly surprising myself when it happens.
Happiness equals expectations versus reality. So, so let's if we curb our expectations, we'll be a lot happier when he overperforms. All right. Question number 2, how long will he be a Zag?
I'd say 2 years would be my safe bet. Although if he does show that he's ready to play and like can come in and make an impact by, consistent impact, and he's taking over those roles like we kind of talked about with Zach Collins, I think he's the most likely of, Hickman and Sallis and that group of guys to make the leap to the NBA and maybe go to the draft as a non-starter, kind of key piece where you're taking him because he has that talent and the ability and the raw, talent and skills. But I safe answers too, but I think there is a chance if we make a deep run and he's a big part of that he could very well be gone after this year.
Yeah, agreed. I think that I personally think that it is going to take a year, 2, maybe 3 for him to get where he needs to be. I in much the same way that, Zach Norvell went after his sophomore year, right? Right.
Yeah, right. His second year of playing.
I personally think he would have benefited from 1 more year of college basketball, but you know what? Like, I totally respect, the man for, going out and getting his money, right? I could see it potentially being a situation like that where, we get to the end of year 2 and there is a question mark, he tests the waters. Yes, he's on some draft boards. Where will he end up? Right. I could see that happening after year 1 or year 1 and year 2, depending on if he decides to come back. I think he'd have to do really, really well. I think he would have to play so well that he works his way into the starting lineup this year in order to end up getting looked at by NBA teams, because I just don't think that he is quite the player that Zach Collins was, who was getting looked at coming off the bench. So yeah.
You brought up Zach Norvell. What is he doing now? I just realized I have no idea where he's playing. Is he playing abroad?
He was on summer league teams, and pretty much I think he saw maybe like 10 minutes cumulative playtime. I think he kind of struggled, and so yeah, I think he's abroad somewhere, or some other European or I don't know. Yeah, he struggled a little bit.
Yeah, so the comparison's pretty good, and I hope Hunter opts for the extra year over what Zach might have done. I personally don't think he'll be gone after this year. I think he's a 2 year. I feel like he's locked into 2 years. That's just my 2 cents. Let's move over to the other man of the hour, Anton Watson. Obviously a third season now for Watson in the Zag uniform. Spent part of the season injured 2 years ago. Didn't really come back as maybe full strength as some people might have anticipated he did last year. Obviously, he, did his best in the tournament, looked pretty good, helped us out quite a bit against UCLA. His defense looked really good. The offense didn't seem to be there as much as we would have hoped. So first question, how much has his game improved after a full healthy offseason? And will we get a more physical, aggressive, and or confident Anton ready to play to his full potential that some thought we may have got last year?
Closing out last year, I think everybody kind of knew some of the things that he needed to work on in order to get to the level that we all know he can play at. And it seems like he put in quite a bit of work. I mean, he spent a few weeks down in Texas training with Drew Timme. And he looked really solid. He just looked more confident at craziness in the kennel. And I know it's only one scrimmage again, but I hope that is indicative of things to come. And I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, he doesn't need to do anything more than he's done already in spurts here and there, right? I think that there are a few plays that he's made in the past that are kind of fresh in all of our minds when we think about Anton at his best, right? And maybe it's a tough catch off of a no look pass from a guard, into like a power dribble going up for a dunk, right? Like that's when he's at his best. Can he add in some of the perimeter game stuff? I think he showed it a little bit in craziness. I think that, if we don't get him reaching his full potential this year, I think that him having to kind of step up and be the leader next year is gonna hopefully make things click for him and go, okay, like I need to be the leader for this team coming in, right? But that's obviously a year away. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Anton. I think he's going to be pivotal for our success this year. And I really, really hope that he's done everything in the offseason to prepare for another national championship run.
Yeah, I think I talked about a lot last year, and we talked about it when, the team was very obviously trying to get him going from a confidence standpoint. We started almost every single game off with some sort of play going to him. And a lot of times when he came into the game, when he was coming off the bench, it was almost immediately that the weak side backdoor cut or get him in the post if he had a mismatch. Like they really wanted to get him going because he was having some serious confidence issues last year, which can wreak havoc on a season. Look at Ben Simmons. I'm not comparing Anton's season last year to that, but like when you lose that confidence, you go from being one of the best to you don't even want to shoot a wide open layup kind of thing. And I think some of it was the shoulder, some of it was the, once he started not having as great of a season and not having that offseason work to expand his game out. But I saw it a lot. I feel like it didn't get talked about enough last year, but like when he would go up with contact at the rim, even if it was his shooting shoulder, it was a lot of times like he wasn't extending it all the way. It looked like he wasn't quite comfortable with that. And I know that's, going up for some of those is how he hurt it in the first place. When you have your shoulder pop out multiple times, there's going to be a mental block, especially fresh off surgery. So I'm really hoping, it sounds from everything that I've heard and we've heard, he had a great offseason. Like Brian said, we saw in craziness that he was comfortable taking some of those longer range shots, which is, I think, going to be huge for him as he gets comfortable. He's had that offseason after shoulder surgery the year before. Being able to shoot it from the outside and just making guys respect him is going to open stuff up so much more for Timme when he's down low, when they're in the game together. I think I mentioned it last week. Maybe it was just in conversation with Brian, the clip that I saw of Timme's footwork, and Anton had it probably 17, 18 feet from the basket And his guy, this was against Creighton, his guy was sitting in the middle of the key, like just not even worried about him thinking about shooting. So just that ability to draw the offense out. And we know he has that first step and the ability to get to the rim. So if he can knock down a shot every once in a while and make guys respect him out there, that's going to be huge. So I have a lot of high expectations for his consistency this year and confidence level coming off of a full off season for his first time coming off a college season, being able to put in that work, feel comfortable with his shoulder, injury-free season, so I'm excited to see what he has. And I think he's going to be ready to go and be a lot more physical and aggressive on the offensive end. We know he has it defensively. So,
yeah, I think, you talk about him adding a shot. I think the other thing this season is he's going to be our backup center coming into the season. So not only would it be awesome to see him add a shot, that those two words, physical and aggressive, on top of the confidence, the physical and aggressive piece, if he can attack the rim on offense, play inside, get offensive boards, be able to play, really big, I think that's going to be key too. Not that Chet can't move down to the 5 and play there, but Chet's really tall and really lanky, and he's a great scorer. He is not and I guess he is physically imposing because he is so tall and lanky and a good scorer, but he's not your like bruising center. Let's put it that way. He's not your bruising center, your bruising big man. And I think if Anton can like embrace that as his role on offense this year, while like you said, being able to add a shot would be awesome and pull defenders out. If he can, come into that role, knowing he's going to come off the bench most likely at this point to start the season, kind of doesn't take the hit to your confidence of starting and then not starting. So maybe with like a mindset, there's not a mindset shift. Maybe he's just like locked into that spot. I'm hoping we're going to really see, I do think we're going to see, full potential Anton this year. And then that's really exciting because I don't think we've seen that yet.
One thing too, you mentioned with having Chet, I think that'll help too, is last year, since we didn't really have a lot of depth in the front court, when he came in, I feel like sometimes on top of the, maybe back of his mind, the shoulder injury and not being quite as aggressive as maybe he could be, I think that was also holding him back, that, he couldn't really get in foul trouble. If Timmy was in foul trouble, he couldn't really get in foul trouble at all. Now you have a little bit more leeway with Chet, and then even with Greg and Perry, who could come in, like he can be a little bit more aggressive, take a few more chances defensively and offensively. But yeah, and that just reminded me too, some of the charges that he had last year where it just looked like he had no clue what he wanted to do with the ball and would kind of get stuck in that middle ground of like, oh, I probably should have shot that 10 to 15 foot jump shot. And now I'm like, oh crap, and just run into the guy. I think that all comes down to the confidence and aggressiveness. And we've covered it now. I think he's going to have that this year.
I kind of just talked about where I see him fitting in the lineup. Backup center, first big man off the bench, got to be a bruiser. Hopefully adds a shot. I think the second part of that question is, will we see him on the floor with Chet and Drew and Timmy on a regular basis? Carson, you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to see it played with a little bit at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of it comes down to what he's done to improve his game and expanding his game in the offseason, and kind of a little bit with Drew Timmy too, because if he's the Anton of last year, I don't know how that really works. Chet can spread it out because he can play on the perimeter, but he's going to be coming to the hoop, and you want him around the basket. If you have those three guys around there, that kind of makes it tough. If they wanted to do it as a defensive thing, like we saw it last year, Anton would come in and the offense would maybe drop a little bit, but the defense he kind of made up for it. That team defensively would be nuts because, Drew Timmy, not a top tier defender, not bad, but like if he's guarding on a post, that's fine. But then you throw in Anton and Chet, like we've talked about a 1-3-1. We know they like to have Anton up front in that, and you put Chet under the basket, Timmy at the high post. Like there's so much length in that and so much aggressiveness that can be like, you can be so aggressive with that because you have Chet down by the hoop to block anything that gets by, which last year we didn't have. When they beat the 1-3-1, it was an easy layup. So I think they're going to toy with it early in the season, maybe not as much in the big games. Maybe in those you see it at a possession in the time, just a possession at a time to throw teams off for short spurts. But if it works, that could be a lethal lineup. I'm just a little concerned about the overall offensive flow, because that's a whole different flow of offense with those three guys in there.
You're asking
third guard.
You're asking Chet to play small forward, which, as much as we've talked about as a possibility, is also a stretch. That 1-3-1 thing you just mentioned, could you imagine the middle of it, like you just said, with Watson, Timmy, Chet, and on the wings, what if you threw like Sallis and Straw? They're both out there, both lanky guys, both long guys, both pretty quick and physical. Like, that's terrifying if I see that 1-3-1 coming down. That's a really interesting point with the 1-3-1 comment.
Also a little terrified of the ball handling in that situation, but Sallis was a ball handler. So, but I mean, even throwing in Nembhard on the wing there, like, he's 6'5", he's got length. So yeah, I mean, I think we could see them use some zone a little bit more this year because of the length that they have. I mean, we've talked about the 2-3 zone a little bit. And there's questions about Timmy on the side of the 2-3, if he could cover that. But when you have Chet down low, that helps a little bit, and the conversation for another time. But there's a lot of fun things you could do with that lineup and the length that we have this year.
What I really want to see is Drew Timmy setting a ball screen for Chet. That's my motivation with that three big lineup, because I think that I don't know, as funny as it is, I mean, as a team trying to defend those three dudes, who do you put on those three guys? I mean, to me, like, Anton's definitely, if he can be a threat on the perimeter and drive by bigger, slower defenders, like, that's outstanding. And then who do you put on Chet? Because I don't know how many teams we're going to face that have, three 6'10" plus dudes that can move well on their feet, that can all play at the same time. Yeah, so for me, like, I don't know, the flow doesn't matter as much because it's just three monster dudes that are just hard to match up with personally, but we'll see what happens.
How many times do you think we're going to hear matchup nightmare about Gonzaga this year?
A lot.
It's going to be the new Jalen Suggs played football. Yeah.
I don't know about how often we'll see the ball screen, although I think that would be interesting to see. But I think we could see a lot more post-to-post screening to get mismatches, because people are going to be trying to play that. They're very different games. Drew Timmy's going to eat you alive if you're not he's going to eat most people alive, but they're going to put their smaller, probably, guy who can defend on the perimeter on Chet most of the time and the big bruiser on Timmy. But if you can get some post-to-post screening there, and that's going to be a mismatch one way or the other. And so I think we're going to see a lot of cool options with that. And I think just a little bit, we've touched on this a little bit the last couple episodes, just some different looks from our offense this year, just because of the different tools we have. Obviously, we just talked about the flow and tempo. And I think that's the one concern I would have, is just that if it slows you down too much to a point where it's too much kind of choppiness as you're subbing in and out in the flow of the game. But if you're throwing in a few sets here and there to get those looks, I think that's going to be a really good option for us.
With Steven Gentry back too, I mean, he's he's a genius.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out, I'm sure.
All right, thanks for sticking with us for another episode of the Zag Talk podcast. Joined again by my co-hosts Carson and Brian. So thanks for listening to us ramble for another hour. We will be back next week. We're going to try to get back into the weekly swing of things, as long as I don't hold up the podcast recording times. You can check us out on Twitter, on Instagram as well now. Zag Talk. You can follow Brian or myself on Twitter. Thanks again for listening to the Zag Talk podcast. We'll see you next week.
Well, and shout out Cowan for editing the podcast. Cowan and Jenkins, everybody.
Shout out Cowan.